The rod bent nearly to breaking as something massive fought beneath the surface. Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip across the water. I said no fishing. But when the stranger turned, holding up a waterlogged wallet with her husband's face staring back at her, the color drained from her cheeks. Because David had been dead for 6 months. And she was the only one who knew why he'd really gone into that lake last summer. The morning mist clung to Mirror Lake like a shroud, and Eleanor Hartwell stood at the edge of her dock, coffee steaming in her hands, watching the water that had taken everything from her. 6 months since David's accident. 6 months since the insurance settlement. 6 months since she'd posted the no fishing, private property signs around the entire shoreline. The signs were her sanctuary, her shield against the world that might ask too many questions about that night last July. The crack of a fishing line cutting through the air shattered the silence. Eleanor's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the dock planks. Across the narrow inlet, maybe 50 yards from her shore, a man stood waist-deep in the water, methodically working his rod with the patience of someone who'd been fishing these waters for years. "Excuse me." Eleanor's voice carried across the water, sharp and authoritative. She'd perfected that tone during her 15 years as a high school principal. "This is private property. No fishing allowed." The man didn't acknowledge her. He cast again, the line arcing gracefully through the morning air before disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She strode down the dock, her footsteps echoing hollow against the weathered boards. "Sir. I'm talking to you." Still nothing. The man adjusted his stance, working the rod with subtle movements that suggested he'd found something worth his attention. Heat flashed through Eleanor's chest, the familiar surge of anger that had become her constant companion since David's death. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let some weekend warrior ruin everything now. "This is private property," she shouted, her voice cracking with fury. "I said no fishing." The man's head turned slowly, and Eleanor got her first clear look at him. Mid-40s, weathered face, eyes the color of deep water. He wore a faded fishing vest over a flannel shirt, and there was something in his deliberate movements that made Eleanor's stomach tighten with unease. He called back, his voice carrying easily across the water. "I'm not on your property. This is public water." "The hell it is. I own 30 feet out from the high water mark." "You're trespassing." The man's rod bent suddenly, the tip dipping toward the water as something heavy pulled on the line. Instead of fighting it, he worked with it, letting the fish run before slowly drawing it back. "Funny thing about property lines," he said, never taking his eyes off the water. "They get real flexible when you're dealing with a lake that's been here longer than the county courthouse." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Get out. Now. Or I'm calling the sheriff." "Go ahead." The man's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "Sheriff Brennan's an old friend. We go way back." The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Brennan was the one who'd investigated David's accident, who'd accepted her story about the late-night swim, the tragic slip, the desperate search. Brennan was the one who'd signed off on the accidental death ruling without asking too many uncomfortable questions. "You don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its edge. The man worked his rod with increasing urgency now, something large and heavy fighting on the other end of the line. "Maybe not. But I know this lake real well. Been coming here since I was a boy. My daddy used to tell me stories about Mirror Lake, about how it never gives up its secrets." Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the dock railing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing much. Just that things have a way of working themselves to the surface, given enough time." The man's rod bent almost double now, the line cutting through the water as whatever he'd hooked made a desperate run toward deeper water. Especially when the water temperature drops in the fall. Things that sink in the summer, well, they tend to float back up come October. The world tilted around Eleanor. October. It was October now. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," she managed, "but no game." The man began reeling in his line with steady, determined pulls. "Just fishing. Amazing what you can catch when you know where to look." Eleanor's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her insurance agent, final paperwork ready for pickup. Congratulations on your new start, Eleanor. $2 million. David's life insurance policy, the one she'd convinced him to increase just 3 months before his death. The one that would finally let her escape this suffocating town, this house filled with 20 years of his broken promises and empty bottles. All she had to do was get through the next few days without anyone asking questions she couldn't answer. The man's rod straightened suddenly, and he began hauling in his line hand over hand. Eleanor watched in growing horror as something dark broke the surface, not a fish, but something rectangular and waterlogged. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "Look what I caught." Eleanor's vision blurred. She gripped the dock railing so hard her knuckles went white. The man held up his catch, water streaming from the dark leather. Even from 50 yards away, Eleanor could see what it was. A wallet. A man's wallet, cracked and stained from months underwater. "Seems like someone dropped this," the man called out. "Right about here." He gestured to the water around him. "Funny place for a wallet to end up, don't you think? Unless maybe someone was out here swimming at night. Maybe had a little too much to drink. Maybe got into some kind of disagreement." Eleanor's legs nearly gave out. She forced herself to remain standing, to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man waded closer to shore, the wallet still dripping in his hand. "Well, lucky for whoever lost it, I found it. Looks like there's still some identification inside. Let's see here." He opened the wallet, water cascading from its folds. David Hartwell. 1247, Lakeshore Drive. Eleanor's world collapsed into a single, terrible moment of clarity. The man looked up from the wallet, his watercolored eyes meeting hers across the expanse of Mirror Lake. "I believe this belongs to your husband." Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because David Hartwell had been dead for 6 months. His body had been cremated, his ashes scattered in the rose garden behind the house. The wallet had been in his pocket that night, when she'd followed him down to the dock, when they'd argued about the insurance money, when he'd threatened to leave her with nothing. When she'd pushed him into the dark water and watched him disappear beneath the surface. The man smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "I think you and I need to have a conversation, Mrs. Hartwell. About fishing rights. About property lines. About what really happened to your husband last summer." Eleanor's carefully constructed world began to crumble as the stranger waded toward her shore, David's wallet clutched in his hand like a smoking gun. And for the first time in 6 months, Eleanor Hartwell realized she might not be the only one who knew the truth about Mirror Lake. The stranger's boots squelched against the muddy shoreline as he approached Eleanor's dock, David's wallet still dripping in his weathered hand. Eleanor forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember the story she'd told the police, the insurance investigators, the grief counselors. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but you're trespassing. Whatever sick game you're playing, game." The man stepped onto her dock without invitation, water pooling around his boots. I don't play games. Name's Marcus Webb. I'm a private investigator." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "A what?" "Hired by Consolidated Life Insurance. You know, the company that cut you that $2 million check." Marcus set the wallet on the dock railing, its sodden leather leaving a dark stain on the white paint. "Funny thing about big payouts, they tend to make people nervous. Especially when the deceased had a history of domestic disputes." David. And I never. Police report from March 15, 2024. Neighbors called in a disturbance. "Your husband had a split lip," Mrs. Hartwell told the officers. He walked into a door. Marcus's smile was razor thin. "Must have been some door." Eleanor's hands shook as she wrapped her arms around herself. David was drinking. He fell down the stairs. "I was trying to help him." "Right." And the report from January 8. When he showed up at the emergency room with bruised ribs. He fell off the roof cleaning gutters. In January. In the snow. At 10 o'clock at night. Marcus picked up the wallet, letting water drip from its edges. You know what I think, Mrs. Hartwell. I think your husband was scared of you. And I think that night in July when he threatened to leave you, to take half of everything in the divorce. Well, I think you decided he wasn't going to leave at all. Eleanor's mind raced. She'd been so careful, so methodical. David had been drunk that night, stumbling around the dock, screaming about how he was done with her manipulation, her control. When she'd pushed him, it had been self-defense. Sort of. You're fishing, she said, the irony of the words not lost on her. You have no proof of anything. Marcus opened the wallet, revealing a credit card holder thick with plastic rectangles. Actually, I do. See, your husband was smarter than you gave him credit for. He knew you were dangerous. So he took precautions. Eleanor watched in horror as Marcus pulled out a small, waterproof memory card from behind David's driver's license. Security camera footage, Marcus said, holding the card up to the morning light. From the neighbor's house across the lake. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, nice folks. They installed cameras after their boat got stolen last spring. Cameras that have a perfect view of your dock. The world tilted sideways. Eleanor gripped a railing to keep from falling. That's impossible. The Pattersons live half a mile away. Amazing what modern technology can do. High definition, infrared capable, motion activated. And David, well, he was handy with electronics. Managed to access their system remotely, download the footage from that night. Marcus slipped the memory card back into the wallet. Funny thing is, the Pattersons never even knew their cameras caught anything. But David did. And he put it all right here in his wallet, along with a letter explaining what he thought you might do. Eleanor's legs gave out. She sank onto the dock, her head spinning. No. No, that's not. David didn't know about computers. You'd be surprised what a man can learn when he thinks his wife might kill him. Marcus crouched down beside her, his voice dropping to a whisper. The footage shows everything, Mrs. Hartwell. The argument. The push. The way you held him under when he tried to surface. Eleanor's stomach lurched. She'd thought David had drowned immediately, that the alcohol and the shock had done the work for her. But she remembered now the way his hand had broken. The surface, reaching for the dock ladder. The way she'd stepped on his fingers, pushing him back down into the dark water. I want to see it, she whispered. No, you don't. Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his knees. But Sheriff Brennan will. And so will the district attorney. And that jury that's going to send you away for the rest of your life. Eleanor looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. What do you want? Money. The insurance settlement. I'll give you half. I'll give you all of it. Marcus shook his head. I don't want your blood money, Mrs. Hartwell. I want justice. See, David wasn't just some random case to me. He was my brother. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She stared at Marcus, seeing for the first time the resemblance around the eyes, the set of the jaw. David had mentioned a brother. Once, years ago. Someone who'd disappeared after a falling out with their father. David never talked about you, she managed. Yeah, well, we had our differences. But blood is blood. And when he called me 3 weeks before he died, scared out of his mind, begging me to help him get away from you. Marcus's voice hardened. I told him he was being paranoid. Told him to grow a backbone and stand up to his wife. Eleanor saw the pain in his eyes, the guilt that matched her own. I got him killed, Marcus continued. But you're the one who murdered him. And now you're going to pay for it. Eleanor's mind scrambled for options, for escape routes. You can't prove any of this. Even if that card has something on it, it's been underwater for 6 months. The data is probably corrupted. Maybe. But I've got other evidence. Like the fact that you increased David's life insurance policy 3 months before he died. Like the fact that you threw away his cell phone the day after the funeral, the phone that had our conversation recorded on it. Like the fact that you paid cash for that new car last month, even though you told everyone you were struggling financially. Each accusation was a nail in her coffin. Eleanor felt the walls closing in, the carefully constructed lie of her new life crumbling around her. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Marcus pulled out his own phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "I want you to tell me exactly what happened that night. Every detail. Every moment. And then I want you to walk into that sheriff's office and confess. And if I don't, then I make this call, and in about 10 minutes, this place will be crawling with cops. Either way, you're done. But if you confess, if you show some remorse for what you did to my brother, maybe the DA will consider a plea deal. Maybe you'll get life instead of the needle." Eleanor stared at the wallet on the railing, water still dripping from its edges like tears. David's face smiled back at her from his driver's license photo, taken 3 years ago when he'd still believed their marriage could be saved. "I loved him," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "I really did, at first. I know. And he loved you. Right up until the end, he hoped you'd change. That's why he stayed as long as he did." Marcus's voice softened slightly. "But love isn't supposed to be a death sentence, Mrs. Hartwell." Eleanor closed her eyes, seeing David's face in the dark water, feeling his fingers beneath her shoe as she'd pushed him down. The weight of that moment, the weight of 6 months of lies, threatened to crush her. When she opened her eyes, Marcus was still waiting, phone in hand. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." But even as she spoke the words, Eleanor's mind was already working, calculating, planning. Because Marcus Webb had made one crucial mistake. He'd told her about the evidence before securing it. And Eleanor Hartwell hadn't survived 20 years of marriage to a violent drunk by giving up easily. The confession would have to wait. First, she had to destroy that memory card. And the only witness who knew it existed. Eleanor's confession began as the sun climbed higher over Mirror Lake, burning away the morning mist. She sat on the dock beside Marcus, her voice steady and clinical, as if she were reading from a script she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "David came home drunk that night. Drunker than usual. He was screaming about the insurance policy, about how he knew what I was planning." She paused, letting a tear slide down her cheek. "I tried to calm him down, but he grabbed me. Shook me. Said he was leaving, that he'd rather die than spend another day with me." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The phone in his hand remained ready, recording every word. He stumbled down to the dock. "I followed him because I was scared he'd hurt himself. When I got there, he was standing at the edge, swaying back and forth. He turned around and he lunged at me." Eleanor's voice cracked with manufactured grief. "I pushed him away. It was self-defense. But he was so drunk, so unsteady. He fell backward into the water. And then..." Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless. "I tried to save him. I threw him the life ring, reached for him when he came up. But he was too heavy, too drunk. He went under and..." Eleanor covered her face with her hands. "I called 911, but by the time they got here, it was too late." Marcus stopped the recording. "That's a beautiful story, Mrs. Hartwell. Almost exactly what you told the police 6 months ago. Except for one problem." Eleanor looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hopeful. "What?" "My brother didn't drink anymore. He'd been sober for 8 months when you killed him." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. Her carefully constructed narrative crumbled in an instant. "That's impossible," she whispered. "David drank every night. I have receipts, credit card statements, for alcohol you bought. That you drank. While you told everyone your husband was the alcoholic." Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "David joined AA after his last DUI. I sponsored him myself. He called me every day for his first 90 days, then every week after that. He was trying to get clean so he could leave you with a clear conscience." Eleanor's mind reeled. The bottles she'd found in David's workshop, the ones she'd shown to the police as evidence of his drinking problem, she'd planted them there herself. But if David had been sober, "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Then explained the toxicology report. The one that shows 0 alcohol in David's system when they pulled him out of the lake. Marcus pulled out a folded document from his jacket. Amazing what a few phone calls and a FOIA request can dig up. The coroner noted it was unusual for someone who allegedly died drunk to have no alcohol in their blood, but the case was closed. So quickly, nobody bothered to investigate. Eleanor stared at the toxicology report, her alibi dissolving like sugar in water. This doesn't prove anything. Maybe he hadn't been drinking that night, the night he allegedly attacked you. The night he was supposedly so drunk he couldn't swim. Marcus's laugh was bitter. David was a champion swimmer in high school. Even after 20 years, he could hold his breath for 3 minutes. But not when someone's holding him underwater. Eleanor felt the trap closing around her. Every lie she'd told, every piece of evidence she'd manufactured, was being systematically dismantled by a man who knew his brother better than she'd ever realized. "What do you want from me?" she asked again. Marcus stood, the wallet still in his hand. "I want you to tell me where you hid the insurance money. All of it. Because when you go to prison, every penny is going to David's real family. His daughter." Eleanor's blood froze. David didn't have a daughter. Your husband had a lot of secrets, Mrs. Hartwell. Including the 18-year-old girl he'd been sending money to for college. His daughter from his first marriage. The one you didn't know about because he was smart enough to keep her away from you. Another lie, another foundation stone of her new life crumbling away. Eleanor had thought she'd known everything about David, had controlled every aspect of his existence. But the man she'd murdered was a stranger. "I don't believe you," she said. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, and held it up. A young woman with David's eyes and smile stared back at Eleanor from a graduation photo. Sarah Webb. She took my name when her mother and I got married. David's been paying her tuition at Northwestern University for 3 years. She's studying to be a teacher, wants to help kids like she used to be. Eleanor's chest tightened. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change anything. You still can't prove I murdered David. Can't I? Marcus opened the wallet again, pulling out the memory card. I told you about the camera footage. What I didn't tell you is that I've already had it analyzed by a digital forensics expert. The water damage was minimal, the card was inside a waterproof case that David sealed himself. Eleanor's hands began to shake. You're bluffing. The timestamp shows 11:47 p.m., July 15th. You and David arguing on the dock. You can clearly see him push you away, gently, like he's trying to get you to leave him alone. Then at 11:52, you pick up that boat hook and swing it at his head. The memory came flooding back. David turning away from her, dismissing her threats. Walking toward the lake. The boat hook in her hands, the satisfying crack when it connected with his skull. The way he toppled into the water, stunned and bleeding. You held him under for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Marcus continued relentlessly. The camera caught it all. Your face, your actions, the way you looked around to make sure no one was watching. And then you went inside and made yourself a drink while my brother died. Eleanor's facade finally cracked. He was going to leave me with nothing. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of putting up with his weakness, his pathetic attempts to be a better man. I wasn't going to let him walk away and start over while I had nothing. So you killed him for money. I killed him because he was mine. Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek. He belonged to me. He didn't get to decide when our marriage was over. Marcus stepped back, his face pale. You're insane. I'm practical. Eleanor wiped her eyes, her grief mask slipping away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. And you've made a very stupid mistake, Marcus. What's that? Eleanor smiled. The expression transforming her face into something predatory. You came here alone. No backup, no witnesses. Just you and your righteous anger and your precious evidence. Marcus's hand moved toward his pocket, but Eleanor was faster. She lunged forward, grabbing the boat hook she'd used to kill David. The same weapon that had ended her husband's life now gleamed in her hands as she advanced on his brother. "You see, Marcus, I've had 6 months to think about this. 6 months to plan for the day someone might come asking questions. And I've decided that if I'm going down, I'm not going down alone." Marcus backed toward the edge of the dock, his phone and David's wallet still in his hands. "You can't kill everyone who knows the truth. I can kill you. And once you're dead, who's going to believe your story?" A grieving widow, driven to temporary madness by a delusional private investigator, who became obsessed with her case. Eleanor's grip tightened on the boat hook. "I'll tell them how you broke into my house, how you threatened me, how I had to defend myself. Self-defense worked once, it'll work again." Marcus's foot hit the edge of the dock. Behind him, Mirror Lake stretched dark and deep, the same water that had claimed his brother now waiting to claim him. "The evidence," he began, "will disappear with you." Eleanor raised the boat hook. "Just like David's memory card. Just like his phone. Just like every trace of the man you failed to save." But as Eleanor swung the weapon toward Marcus's head, she made the same mistake she'd made with David. She underestimated her victim. Marcus Webb wasn't a drunk, broken man worn down by years of abuse. He was a trained investigator, a former Marine, and a man with nothing left to lose. He caught the boat hook mid-swing, twisting it from Eleanor's grip and sending her stumbling backward. The wallet flew from his other hand, spinning through the air before landing at the edge of the dock. The memory card scattered across the weathered boards, precious evidence now exposed to the morning sun. Eleanor lunged for the card, but Marcus was there first. They grappled on the dock, two people fighting for justice and survival, while below them, Mirror Lake waited patiently to claim another victim. The battle for David's truth had begun in earnest. The dock groaned under the weight of their struggle, weathered boards creaking as Eleanor and Marcus fought for control of the memory card. Eleanor's manicured nails raked across Marcus's face, drawing blood, while he tried to pin her arms without seriously injuring her. "You killed my brother," Marcus grunted, grabbing her wrist as she clawed at his eyes. "Your brother was weak." Eleanor spat back, bringing her knee up toward his groin. "Just like you." Marcus twisted away, but Eleanor's desperate lunge sent them both tumbling toward the edge of the dock. The memory card skidded across the boards, coming to rest inches from the water. Eleanor saw her chance. She broke free from Marcus's grip and dove for the card, her fingers closing around the tiny piece of plastic that held her fate. But as she raised it triumphantly, Marcus's hand clamped down on her wrist. "Let go," she screamed, trying to shake him off. "Never." Marcus's voice was steel. "That card is the only justice David's going to get." Eleanor's other hand found the boat hook, still lying where Marcus had dropped it. She swung it wildly, catching him across the shoulder. He grunted in pain but didn't release her wrist. "You want to know what David said before he died?" Eleanor hissed, her face inches from his. "He said your name. Begged me to call you. Said you were the only one who ever understood him." Marcus's grip loosened slightly, and Eleanor felt a sick satisfaction at the pain in his eyes. "He said he was sorry," she continued, twisting the knife deeper. "Sorry for not listening to you. Sorry for marrying me. Sorry for wasting his life on a woman who could never love him back." "Stop." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "He died knowing that his big brother was right about everything. That I was poison. That he should have run when he had the chance." Eleanor smiled, savoring the devastation on Marcus's face. "And you know what the funny thing is? He still thought you'd come save him. Right up until the end." Marcus's hand trembled on her wrist. For a moment, Eleanor thought she'd broken him, that guilt and grief would make him let go. But then his grip tightened again, and when he looked at her, his eyes burned with renewed fury. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed him. I let him down when he needed me most. But I won't fail him again." Before Eleanor could react, Marcus yanked her forward, both of them tumbling off the dock into the cold water of Mirror Lake. The shock of the icy water drove the breath from Eleanor's lungs. She surfaced, gasping, the memory card still clutched in her fist. Marcus came up beside her, blood from his facial scratches mixing with the lake water. "You can't swim with that card," he said, treading water. "And you can't get back to shore without letting go of it." Eleanor looked around wildly. The dock was 8 feet away, the shore another 20. She was a decent swimmer, but not with one hand occupied. And Marcus was right, she couldn't risk the card getting wet. "This is over, Eleanor," Marcus said, using her first name for the first time. "Give me the card and I'll help you back to shore. We'll wait for the police together." Eleanor's mind raced. The card was worthless if it got damaged, but it was also worthless if Marcus got his hands on it. She needed a different strategy. "You know what?" she said, her voice suddenly calm. "You're right. This is over." Before Marcus could react, Eleanor opened her fist and let the memory card fall into the dark water. It disappeared instantly, swallowed by the lake that had claimed her husband. "There," she said, smiling at Marcus's horrified expression. "Now. It's your word against mine. And I'm the grieving widow who was attacked by her dead husband's delusional brother." Marcus dove under the water, desperately searching for the card, but Eleanor knew it was hopeless. The lake was 20 feet deep at this point, the bottom covered in decades of silt and debris. The card was gone. She began swimming toward shore, her strokes strong and confident. Behind her, she could hear Marcus surfacing, gasping for air. "It's over, Marcus," she called back. "You have nothing." But as Eleanor reached the shallow water near the dock, she realized she'd made a critical error. Marcus wasn't behind her anymore. He was ahead of her, standing waist-deep in the water, blocking her path to shore. "You're right," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I don't have the card anymore. But I don't need it." Eleanor treaded water, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. The dock was to her left, the shore to her right, and Marcus between her and both. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but even as she spoke, she saw the small device in Marcus's hand. A smartphone, its screen glowing in the morning light. "I've been live streaming this whole conversation," Marcus said, holding up the phone. "Every word you said, every confession, every threat. It's all being recorded to the cloud in real time." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "That's impossible. There's no cell service out here." "Satellite internet," Marcus said. "Amazing what technology can do these days. I've been streaming to my partner's computer for the last 2 hours. She's been watching everything." Eleanor's mind reeled. If Marcus was telling the truth, then thousands of people could have witnessed her confession, her attack, her admission of guilt. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus turned the phone around, showing her the screen. Eleanor could see herself treading water, her face pale with terror. In the corner of the screen, a chat box scrolled with comments from viewers. Did she really just confess to murder? Someone call the cops. This is insane. That poor man. Eleanor's world collapsed. Even if she somehow got out of this water, even if she made it back to shore, she could never escape what had just been broadcast to the world. "Jenny," Marcus said, speaking to the phone. "Call Sheriff Brennan. Tell him to bring backup. And call the DA, we're going to need to talk to him about murder charges." Eleanor felt the fight drain out of her. The water was cold, her clothes were heavy, and she was tired. So very tired of running, of lying, of pretending to be someone she wasn't. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since the day I got the call that David was dead," Marcus replied. "I knew you'd killed him. I just had to prove it." Eleanor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You know what the ironic thing is? I actually thought I was smart. I thought I'd planned everything perfectly." "You did plan it perfectly," Marcus said. "But you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You assumed David was stupid. You assumed he wouldn't fight back, wouldn't leave evidence, wouldn't tell anyone what he suspected." Marcus's voice was sad now, heavy with grief. "But David was smarter than both of us gave him credit for. He knew what you were, Eleanor. And he made sure that even if you killed him, you wouldn't get away with it." Eleanor looked around at the water that had become her prison, at the dock where she'd murdered her husband, at the phone that had captured her downfall. In the distance, she could hear the sound of sirens approaching. David's daughter, she said suddenly. Sarah. What happens to her now? She gets the life insurance money. She gets to know that her father loved her enough to die protecting her inheritance. And she gets to know that justice was served. Marcus's voice was firm. She gets everything you tried to steal from her. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the water around her, the weight of her crimes, the weight of 20 years of choices that had led to this moment. When she opened them again, Sheriff Brennan's boat was rounding the bend, its lights flashing red and blue across the surface of Mirror Lake. It's funny, Eleanor said, her voice barely audible above the sound of the approaching sirens. I always thought this lake was my sanctuary. My safe place where no one could touch me. No, Marcus said, his eyes never leaving her face. This lake was David's sanctuary. And it's been waiting 6 months to give him justice. Eleanor Hartwell's reign of terror was finally over. But as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists and Sheriff Brennan read her rights, she realized that her punishment was only just beginning. The lake had given up its secrets. Now it was time to pay the price. Sarah Webb stood at the edge of Mirror Lake, a bouquet of white lilies in her hands and tears streaming down her face. The morning mist clung to the water just as it had the day Marcus had confronted Eleanor Hartwell, but now the lake felt different. Peaceful. As if it had finally exhaled a breath it had been holding for too long. I brought your favorite flowers, she said to the water, her voice carrying across the still surface. Mom told me you used to pick them for her when you were dating. The trial had been a media sensation. Eleanor Hartwell's live-streamed confession had been viewed over 50 million times, spawning documentaries, true crime podcasts, and endless analysis of how a seemingly ordinary woman could become a cold-blooded killer. Eleanor herself had pled guilty to avoid the death penalty, accepting a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But for Sarah, the spectacle had been secondary to the revelation that her father, the man she'd barely known, had loved her enough to die protecting her future. Marcus told me about the money you saved, she continued, scattering lily petals on the water. How you worked double shifts at the factory and skipped meals so you could pay for my college. I never knew. Mom never told me. The insurance settlement had indeed gone to Sarah, all $2 million of it. But more than the money, she'd inherited something far more valuable, the truth about David Hartwell. Not the broken drunk Eleanor had portrayed him as, but a man who'd fought his demons, won, and died trying to protect the daughter he'd had to leave behind. I graduated summa cum laude last month, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. Elementary education. Just like I planned. I start teaching in the fall at Jefferson Elementary. Inner city kids who need someone to believe in them. She paused, watching a fish jump in the distance. I think you would have been proud. Marcus emerged from the tree line behind her, older now, grayer, but with a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there during the dark months of the investigation. He carried a fishing rod and a tackle box, moving with the quiet reverence of someone visiting a sacred place. You're early, he said softly, setting down his gear. I couldn't sleep. Sarah replied. I keep thinking about him. About what his last moments must have been like. Marcus joined her at the water's edge. He wasn't alone, he said. I know that doesn't make it easier, but he called me that night. 3 hours before Eleanor killed him. We talked for almost an hour. Sarah turned to him, surprised. You never told me that. I was ashamed. He reached out for help, and I told him he was being paranoid. Told him to stop running from his problems and face them like a man. Marcus's voice cracked. If I'd listened, if I'd believed him, you'd both be dead, Sarah said firmly. Eleanor would have found a way to kill you too. Dad knew that. That's why he hid the evidence instead of just calling the police. He was protecting you. Marcus nodded, but Sarah could see the guilt still eating at him. She understood. She carried her own burden of regret for all the Father's Days she'd ignored his calls, all the Christmas cards she'd thrown away unopened, all the chances she'd had to know the real David Hartwell. What did you two talk about? That last night. Marcus smiled sadly. You, mostly. He was so proud of you, Sarah. Proud that you'd made something of yourself despite everything. He said you had your mother's strength and his stubborn streak, and that combination was going to change the world. Sarah laughed through her tears. Sounds like him. Mom always said he was an eternal optimist. He was planning to leave Eleanor. That week, Marcus continued. Had already talked to a lawyer, found an apartment. He was going to fight for partial custody, try to be part of your life again. He said he knew he couldn't undo the past, but maybe he could help build your future. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire adult life convinced that David Hartwell had abandoned her, that he'd chosen alcohol and his toxic marriage over his daughter. To learn that he'd been planning to come back, to fight for her, just days before his death. Why didn't he call me himself, she whispered. He was scared, Marcus said simply. Scared you'd hang up on him. Scared Eleanor would find out and use you to hurt him. He was going to wait until he was free of her, until he could offer you something better than a father who was trapped in his own hell. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining the phone call that never came. The conversation they'd never had. The relationship they'd never built. I forgive him, she said suddenly, the words surprising even her. For everything. For leaving, for staying away, for getting himself killed before we could fix things. I forgive him. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. He forgave you too, you know. For being angry with him. For cutting him out of your life. He understood why you did it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over Mirror Lake. In the distance, a loon called out, its haunting cry echoing across the water. I have something for you, Marcus said, reaching into his tackle box. He pulled out a small, waterproof container and handed it to Sarah. Inside was a letter, written in David's careful handwriting on yellow legal paper. The ink had run slightly from exposure to moisture, but the words were still legible. My beautiful daughter, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the years I missed, all the birthdays and graduations and first days of school. I'm sorry for being weak when you needed me to be strong. Most of all, I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't worth fighting for. But you were worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. You're the best thing I ever did in this life, and even though I failed you in so many ways, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. I know your mother told you I was drunk the night I left. That's not true. I left because Eleanor threatened to hurt you if I tried to take you with me. She said she'd make sure you knew what kind of man your father really was, that she'd destroy any chance we had of having a relationship. I was young and scared, and I believed her. I should have fought harder. I should have called the police, hired lawyers, moved heaven and earth to protect you. Instead, I ran. I told myself I was protecting you by staying away, but the truth is I was protecting myself from facing my failures as a father. I've been sober for 8 months now. I found AA, found God, found the strength to start over. I've been saving money to fight for custody, to prove I'm worthy of being your dad again. I don't know if it's too late, but I have to try. If something happens to me before I can make things right, I want you to know that every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I made, every day I stayed sober was for you. The insurance money, the college fund, all of it, it's yours. Build the life you deserve, sweetheart. Be the teacher you dreamed of being. Help kids who feel as lost as we both did. And remember that your dad loved you. Loved you enough to die knowing you'd be okay. All my love, David. Sarah clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing openly now. All the anger she'd carried, all the resentment and pain and confusion, it was washing away like silt in the current, leaving behind something clean and pure. Where did you find this? She managed. In his workshop, hidden inside an old tackle box. He'd written dozens of drafts, kept starting over, trying to find the right words. Marcus's own eyes were wet. I think he knew he was running out of time. Sarah folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She would keep it forever, read it whenever she doubted herself or her father's love. Thank you, she said. For finding the truth. For getting justice. For bringing him back to me. Marcus picked up his fishing rod, checking the line. Mind if I cast a few lines? I like to think David would have wanted someone fishing his favorite spot. Sarah smiled. He would have. Just a catch and release, okay. Let them go back to their families. As Marcus waded into the water, Sarah scattered the last of the lily petals on the surface. They floated there like tiny white prayers, carried by the gentle current toward deeper water. I love you too, Dad, she whispered. And I forgive you. We are going to be okay. The sun broke through the morning clouds, turning Mirror Lake into a sheet of gold. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt her father's presence not as a ghost or a memory, but as a warm certainty that love, once given, never truly dies. Behind her, Marcus's line arced through the air and disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The lake accepted this offering as it had accepted all the others, the secrets, the lies, the evidence, the truth. But now, finally, it could rest. Eleanor Hartwell was where she belonged. David's daughter had found peace. And Mirror Lake had kept its promise to give up its secrets when the time was right. Some fish were worth the wait to catch. Some truths were worth a lifetime to surface. And some love was strong enough to survive even death. The water remembered everything. But now, at last, it could forgive.